Alright, in this video, I want to show you a bunch of things that point to 2025. Interesting stuff. You take it, leave it, but I hope you take a moment to hear me out here. Now, the first thing I'll bring up isn't necessarily tied directly to 2025, but it has to do with this here. I have two different charts here. Let me make this one a little bit bigger for you. This is showing the year Abraham was born if you start from Adam when he was born, being year 0, and then 1948 or 1948 years later, Abraham is born. According to this chart, and it's using the dates given to us in the genealogies from Genesis. Yet when we come to this one, as you can see down here at the bottom, Abraham is said to be born 2008 years later. So what I get from this is that I'm going to have to calculate it myself, or you can do so. But why? Well, you see, if he's actually born here in 1948, then you can get ideas of what's going to happen with Israel, because Israel was also formed as a nation in 1948. So you can look at the life of Abraham and the things that happened to him at different ages, and then look at Israel as a nation and see what may be applying to them at the same ages. But interesting, but I can't quite verify it that he was actually born at that time. At first I thought people were saying he was born in 1948 BC, but that actually contradicts what I found over here. And that is that Isaac married Rebekah in 2025 BC. I know this here says 2027 BC, but the other stuff here, the only reason why I'm bringing this part up here is because what it says here in Genesis 25:20, which is just 2025 reversed, mentions Isaac marrying Rebekah. And it's the only mention of Isaac marrying her is right there in Genesis 25:20, which is the flipped version of 2025. And again, I know it says here they were married in 2027 BC, but just like we have two different accounts of when Abraham was born, there's other calculations that show it's 2025 BC when Isaac marries Rebekah. Interesting stuff, right? Very interesting stuff. But there's an issue with this. You may be seeing the issue. Let's say this is 2025 BC. Does that line up with Abraham being born 1948 years after Adam was created? Now, see, that's something that we would have to take and look at how it applies to the calendar we're using today, the Gregorian calendar. And we would have to rewind time and see what year it was when it was about 1948 years after the creation of Adam. And then when we can see that date, and then if it lines up with Isaac being born, and then when he is 40, if that lines up with the year 2025 BC, maybe you know someone who's already done this math, calculated this out, or you want to do it yourself. I'm going to think about it. I just don't know how I'll go about actually doing that. Matter of fact, before I give this last piece of information that I want to go over, we can actually open up a new tab. Let's go to duckduckgo.com. Make sure I'm using their search engine here. And we'll take a look here. What year was Abraham born Gregorian calendar. Let's see what comes up here. I don't know what we're going to find. BC. We have 1948 here. I don't know if they're trying to say 1948 BC. Let's try this one here. See what we get here. Timeline, biblical calendar proof. It's taking a minute to load. I guess because I'm doing so much at one time. Alright, 46 BC, God's clock starts time as we know it in Adam's birth. Alright, let's keep going. When do we have Abraham? This is a site that I actually think I'm going to bookmark and take a look over. Alright. Shem is the line that Abraham comes from. So we see that's already about. Or, there we go. Abraham says that he is born in 2033 BC. So if he is born in 2033 BC, there is no way that Isaac could have married Rebekah in 2025 BC, because Abraham would only be about 8 years old if this is correct. But let's see if we see anything for 1948. We have 1958. We have a couple of things happen here. But we have 1947, Ishmael's birth. That's closely tied to Israel, born the year later, right? That's kind of interesting. And Abraham was 86 years old when Ishmael was born. Maybe we shouldn't be applying Israel to Abraham's life, but maybe to, I don't know, Isaac's? But then I don't know where we'd go from there, because he was 40 years old when he marries Rebekah. That would be 1988. Yeah. So you see how some of these things, they don't quite line up, and then we got different starting points. And it's kind of hard to figure out which is which and what's correct. Maybe you got more information on it. If you do, share that with me. But these things, some of the people have taken this stuff and they've lined it up to 2025. Now, there is another thing I would want to bring up before I bring up this last point here. And I'm not sure how to type this in. I might just have to go and show you. But let's just put in the year the Dome of Rock was built. Because a lot of people say this is his depiction of the abomination of desolation. And there's dates that I've seen that are, like it says here, between 685 and 705 AD here, but I'm not sure if that's exactly the time it's showing. But let's go to the Britannica. Let's see what they say. Because a lot of people don't like Wiki. So let's see if it gives us a year here. We don't care about architecture. We're looking for the year. A year that this thing was born. Jerusalem was captured by 638 AD. So here we go, right here. 691 to 692 AD. They call it CE now, but I still say it's AD. So in this time frame, Dome of the Rock was established. Why does this matter? Well, let's come over here to the Bible real quick. Let's go to Daniel. Make sure we're using the good old trustworthy KJV. And we're going to come over to chapter 12 here. And down here we get some time frames. And it says here at verse 11, and from that time the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up there shall be 1,290 days. What's interesting is if you take this time here and you subtract this. I don't know if we can have a calculator on this thing to show you, but let's see if we can just do a calculator search here. We can just use one real quick. Alright, let's see here. So let's go 691 minus, what was it again? 1,290? 1,290 days. So we'll minus 1,290 equals, and right here you also got to calculate the switch from BC to AD. I'm not sure if you add a year, minus a year, but this is around the time that you have Babylon destroying the temple. So they stop the abomination. They actually stop the sacrifices, because it says here, when the time of the daily sacrifices are taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate is set up. So you see here, when you take when the sacrifices are stopped, so the temple is destroyed by Babylon, and 1,290 days or years later, we have 691, the abomination desolation set up. But check out what else comes out of this. Again, something that leads to 2025 here. So we go to 691 when the abomination of desolation was set up, and then we add the 1,335 days, as it says here in verse 12. See, it says, blessed is he that waiteth. So you want to be blessed. It says right here, blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,335 days. So once this abomination desolation comes up, if we add the 1,335 days equals, well, my bad, 2026. So let's redo that. I did put in the right numbers, right? Because I thought it came to 2025. That's got to be weird. 1,335 equals, yep, 2026. So my bad. So here, doesn't go to 2025. It's good doing these things live, right? You eat some humble pie. But you notice some of these dates that I'm trying to show bring to 2025. Not quite there, but that's pretty dang close, especially since the rapture would happen probably before the end and before all this gets started, right? So it was like I was saying, the earliest the rapture would happen would be in the fall of 2024, and the latest would be the spring of 2026. That falls right into it. So the last thing I want to bring up is actually right here, something that just showed up. I was watching Heather R's channel, and it's Heather space and the letter R. Just in case you're wondering how it's spelled out, if you want to look her up. And she recently had a video from the time that I'm making this video about, let me see if I can remember the title, about why 1406 is important, the 10th of Nisan, and there was a bit added to that title, and she's talking about why 1406 BC is important, and the 70th Jubilee, and she goes through this calculation, being very precise, showing why we have a certain dates that we start with and how we get to different calculations of when we go through the Jubilees and different events that happened at these Jubilee cycles, eventually leading us to 2025, and as this says here, March 2025. Right? So this Jubilee is coming. Usually it's the very next year is the actual Jubilee. It's the start of a new cycle, and the first year of the new cycle is that Jubilee year. So even though we might be in that time, it would be the following. So that's kind of interesting, right? I mean, we're here, we're at the cusp, which is very cool, exciting. But this here is just kind of one witness, isn't it? Because everything else I've shown, we're not quite sure, right? Did Isaac really marry Rachel in 2025 BC? Because from things we looked at, Abraham was born in 2033 BC. So how could he have had Isaac when he's 8 years old and Isaac be 40 years old just 8 years later after being born, right? That doesn't add up. So maybe the stuff I looked up is wrong. I don't know. Because there's people who come to these different calculations, and I don't know how they're getting to these different points, and how when you look it up, you don't actually get consistency. But this right here is just something taken from the Bible and calculating from the Bible. Right? We're not looking at man's calendar, a pagan, heathen, worldly calendar. We're just taking what the Bible says and using Jubilees, and we come to this date, right, into 2025. So we have one witness for that. But there's other interesting things, such as maybe Isaac really did marry Rebecca in 2025. Because Isaac would represent Jesus, and Abraham would represent his father, and Rebecca would represent the bride, the church. So that's very interesting, right? But as also, we got a date there that said 2027. And then when we calculated from the Dome of the Rock, it was 2026, right? When we went the 1,335 days. So we got years from 2025 to 2027. It's kind of, we don't have conjoining witnesses. We don't have a bunch of witnesses saying 2027. We don't have a bunch of witnesses saying 2026. We don't have a bunch of witnesses saying 2025. But there are some other things that are interesting. And that's what I'll wrap up this video with, is that, for example, Enoch, using what they call gematria, where they take the letters and turn them to numbers, and then they calculate the numbers. Such as we're told in, Revelation 13, to calculate the number of the name of the beast. It's basically that same thing. You see his name, you're able to see how the letters are numbers, you add those numbers together, you get a certain number. Well, when you do Enoch, who represents the church that was taken, it adds up to 45. 45 is 20 plus 25. Kind of weird that you would divide it up 20 to 25, because you can also say it's 1035, right? You can also say it's 3015, right? 30 plus 15. You could say it's 40 plus 5, or you can say it all kinds of different ways, right? But it's still kind of interesting. You have Elijah. His name calculated is 45. Again, 2025. 20 plus 25. Again, I wouldn't say these are solidified evidences for 2025. It's kind of, I admit, grasping at some straws here. But, you kind of hope that it's true. Well, you kind of hope it's kind of leading that way. Because you also have Psalm 45, which is a psalm about a marriage. And the very next, Psalm 46, is about some time of trouble and destruction going on. So you get a depiction of rapture and then destruction. And that would be 2025, 2026, right? And as I've been saying, I believe World War III starts in the summer of 2026, according to the signs in the sun, moon, and stars that happened 3 years before World War I. Same signs happened 3 years before World War II, and we've seen these same signs in the sun, moon, and stars happening in 2023. So 3 years later, each one of these wars started in the summer. I think at the 9th of Av, actually. So I'd imagine 3 years later, 2026, in the summer, 9th of Av, we're going to have World War III. But time will tell, right? And I imagine the church would be taken before then. But the church was here during World War I and World War II, so maybe that World War III is caused partly by the rapture. And it has to do with their Revelation 12, where there's a war in heaven. There's a spiritual war going on. There's also a physical war going on at the same time. I think it's connected. So, I think that's about everything. I think there might have been some other semi-interesting connections to 2025, but they're slipping my mind right now. There is a guy, a YouTube channel called New Moon Rapture, who has a lot of stuff that has to do with 2025. Apparently he's been saying it for a while and has these interesting connections, some of which I brought up here in this video. And I just wanted to share all this stuff with you, but also show you how it's kind of tough because you don't have a consistent, solidified, excuse me, it doesn't have something that we can really say, oh yeah, everybody agrees, all the evidence points to this time. We have one pretty solid one about the 70 Jubilees from 1406. We seem to have an agreement on that one. But where Abraham was born in 1948 BC, or was he born 1,948 years after the creation of Adam or the fall of Adam? Don't know. Because that would also determine whether or not it's true that Isaac truly married Rebecca in 2025 BC, which again would be very interesting. But if Abraham was born, let's say 1948 BC, well, Isaac couldn't have married Rebecca in 2025 BC because that happened before. Because you need, so BC, the bigger the number, the earlier it was, the opposite of where we're at now. The bigger the number, the later we are. The bigger the number, the earlier you were when you reverse it, right? So Isaac couldn't have married Rebecca before his father was even born. I mean, that's just common sense. So we don't have a lot of consistency with what's going on. It's kind of hard to figure that out, to know for sure what is what. I think there's people just looking and grasping things like, hey, this shows this, but like the Bible says, you need 2 or 3 witnesses to establish a fact. And I can't really tell you that I've brought you 2 or 3 witnesses, right? The only thing I can add to, where was it? To this, showing 2025, is what I've already looked over with Matthew 24, calculating the time from a generation being 70 to 80 years, and that generation would end up seeing what is told to us in Matthew 24, that the earliest the rapture could happen would be in the fall of 2024, the latest would be the spring of 2026. So the main part of that is 2025, which lines up with this. So that, I would say, is a second witness. And I thought I had a third one, but it seemed to have slipped my mind when I was saying this. Oh, yes, the calculating from the Dome of the Rock. It's not an exact time that is the year 691, because some of the stuff I looked at said it was 688 was when it was actually built, which would put us 3 years before that, so 2023. So that obviously that's not correct. But that doesn't quite line up, but it does line up with what I was saying is the latest is the spring of 2026. So, and by spring, it's like the start of summer, like the Feast of Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks there. Possibly the Feast of Wine, but that's getting into the summer there at Pentecost. But yeah, I give you two pretty solid witnesses. You know, bringing in the whole Matthew 24 and calculating that time. So I guess I've given you two witnesses for 2025. And you need 2 or 3 witnesses, right? So 2025 could be that time. I've given you some other stuff somewhat looking like it points to it, but not quite. Matter of fact, another witness just popped into my head. I remember God a minute. He was talking about Jacob. Jacob was the one named Israel. So we should look at Jacob when we look at Israel. When Jacob was born, we have Israel being born as a nation. And when Jacob was 77, he married Leah, his first marriage. Israel is going to be 77 in 2025. Right? But that is not until the spring of 2025. That's when Israel finally turns 77 years old. And they're going to be 77 for a whole year. So by the spring of 2025 to the spring of 2026 would be the end of that 77th year, because then Israel would be 78. So again, that ties into what I've been saying about the earliest would be the fall of 2024, the latest would be the spring of 2026. So there's a third witness, but it also leads us a little bit into 2026. That's because God's year starts in the spring. You know, April's Fool's Day, that has to do with when the true year actually starts according to God. Right at that time, the spring starts the year. And we started a couple months, obviously, 3 months or so before God does. Right? We started almost in the middle of winter for some odd reason. I don't know how that happened, but that's just where it is, right? So we need to take all that into consideration. I know this is kind of a weird, not very well planned out video, but I had all this stuff on my mind. I wanted to share it, and a lot of times while I'm going through this stuff and I share it with other people, things come to me and the pieces start to come together and it starts to make sense. So all in all, this seemed like a big mess, but we'll go over that we have 3 pretty solid witnesses. One is the Jubilees from 1406 BC. 70 Jubilees are determined upon Israel. That ends 2025. Calculating the generation, the fig tree generation, and seeing all the things that happened in Matthew 24, and starting with the birth of Israel in 1948, brings us 2025. Right? Then we have Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, and Israel back as a nation in 1948 kind of symbolizes the birth of Jacob, right? The birth of Israel. And when he was 77 years old, he is married to Leah. Right? So right there, that also points to 2025. So we got 3 solid witnesses right there. I take that to be solid witnesses. Now we got some others not so solid, such as I brought up Enoch, Elijah, Psalm 45, 2 people who were raptured, a psalm about a marriage having to do with 45, which is the combination of 2025. Not a very solid thing to use, but it does add to the witnesses already, especially since Psalm 46, sudden destruction, time of trouble, right afterwards, lines up with what we're seeing. And Isaac marrying Rebekah in 2025 BC. That could be true, but we can't really say for sure that's really when it happened, because I don't got a lot of collaborating evidence to say so, especially since there's a lot of evidence saying that Abraham was born in 1948 BC. So how can someone's father be born after the son? It just obviously doesn't make sense, right? So again, that's not a very solid one, right? And a pretty solid one, actually a real solid one, again pointing to the same time, is the Dome of the Rock and the 1335 years afterwards, which would bring us to 2026, assuming the Dome of the Rock was actually built in 691. So that's pretty interesting there. It's a little bit past 2025, but if you understand that God's year starts at spring, that it's from the spring of 2025 to the spring of 2026, which actually would be that year according to God. So even though it compasses the year 2025 and 2026, it would be the same year on God's calendar. So pretty solid right there. That one I could say is a fourth witness, a pretty solid one there. The only reason why I'm saying it's not as solid as the other three is because we're not sure if it was really built in 691 AD or not, and it doesn't line up with the 2025. It does, but it doesn't, right? So it's still a solid one, but yeah, so that's a quick recap of all this information. Don't forget about what this says here. If life was really fair, we would all be crucified for our sins, our sinful nature, and our impure hearts, because there's nothing we can do to purify our hearts, to truly do things unselfishly for our love for God and love for our fellow man. We do things to save ourselves from hell and to earn heaven. So we're condemned because we're just selfish creatures. We have the impure desires. We actually want to rebel and sin against God because we enjoy it. When we can't change this fact. Nothing we can do to save ourselves from our own nature. Not to mention that we have sins that we can't wash away. So thank God life's not fair. Right? Because if it was, we would be screwed. Or nailed to a cross. Right? So, with that being said, accept God's free gift while you can, because there's a time coming here after the rapture where you don't want to be here, because you're either going to have to suffer and die or suffer for a good 7 years to save your flesh or to save your soul, where you can just accept God's sacrifice, his life for yours in exchange, and be saved now and avoid all these things. So with that being said, thanks for supporting my channel by watching all the way through. I hope you got something out of it. Maybe got your wheels turning. You got more information you want to add to this. Please share it with me in the comment section. You got things that go against this, share it with me. Right? Because I know I got the rapture fever, and when you're really looking for it, you want it to happen. You look for things that line up to it happening sooner rather than later. Right? Like I found all this information that's going to happen today, right? Because you want it to happen today. And I know that can blind you. So I know that can be happening to me. So if you see that, you think you see it happening to me, say something. And with that being said, you please support by praying that I'm able to keep going and this ministry keeps going, that God supports all of this until he comes back. And you can interact in the comment section, hitting the like, subscribe, hitting that bell icon. It'll help support the channel. Sharing the video helps support the channel. And if you see that I'm fighting that good fight that's done with words to win the hearts and minds of people, to save souls and to feed God's sheep, and that this is done with words, not with fisticuffs and with physical bread, then you can help out financially. There's 4 ways to do so in the info box. If you want and you're able to. You got to have both of those. You got to want to and you got to be able to. Because if you want to and you're not able to, don't worry about it. If you don't want to and you're able to, don't worry about it. If it's both, awesome. I appreciate it. But yeah, that is that. Take care and stay tuned for the next one. And I hope when I'm looking at the camera that it looks like over here on my thing that I'm actually looking at the camera. Because every time I look over, it looks like I'm looking off to the side. But yeah, when I'm looking like this, I'm looking right into the camera. And I think it might be actually weird now that I see that. But later.